Hey everyone, Adrian here from But Why Tho, the podcast, and But Why Tho, Wiki community. Today I'm joined by New York bestselling author and Star Wars lore guru himself, Cavan Scott. Cavan, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I know a lot of our writers are a big fan of your work, not just for your Star Wars work. So I'm really honored to be able to steal some of your time to have our listeners learn a little bit more about you.
No problem. Thanks for the intro. I always like being called a guru. I will pay you later.
Sounds great. So before we jump into kind of the Star Wars and kind of the meat of our conversation, I would love to, well, of course you start scratching right now. We'll get that in post, no worries. Before we jump into, your work in Star Wars and like the meat of our conversation, I would love to briefly talk about some of your previous work that kind of inform how you approach writing in like this wide spanning universe. So just straight away, what got you into writing? Was this always your plan to be, lore guru, best-selling author Cavan Scott, or did you have other aspirations before?
I think it's the dream of every writer to be best-selling author and that kind of thing. I was a magazine writer before I worked in fiction, working for a big magazine company over here in the UK. And literally it's 21 years ago now, I got my first chance to write for a property. For a property that's quite big over here, and actually since then has become big around the world with Doctor Who. And this was at a period where Doctor Who had been off the telly for a long time, and there was no idea that it was going to come back, and the BBC didn't believe it was coming back at all, and so they licensed it out to a audio company called Big Finish, and myself and a person I was working with, Mark Wright, put together a pitch for a Doctor Who audio. This was a series that they were getting back the original actors. It was new stories. It was radio drama. I was a big fan of radio drama. It's a big thing over here in the UK still. And so we pitched something through, got rejected, and then they changed their mind and asked us to make some changes. And that was our first work together, and my first work writing fiction professionally. I'd written fan fiction before for fanzines, Doctor Who, probably a bit of Star Wars in there. I think I wrote a Batman Dreadful bit of Batman fan fiction back in the day, which gave me the bug, which actually led to me writing for magazines, because writing for fanzines got me that bug of wanting to write for magazines. So that was the beginnings, and it went from there. We ended that first audio drama on a cliffhanger purposely, because we wanted to be invited back, and it was a bit of a gamble, but it worked. And so that was the beginning of my career.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So you've mentioned a whole lot of different things in your start there. Also, feel free to share any Batman fiction. Our community loves a little bit of bat flick. So just like that work, you have a pretty wide ranging in genre, and not only genre, but also target audience. So do you have a favorite genre that you enjoy writing for, or demographic you enjoy writing for? Because you have, lots of younger audiences, you have lots of the older adult novels as well. But what would you say is your favorite in that mix?
So I think my favorite, and I think anyone who's read, especially some of the stuff recently that's been coming out from the High Republic will get this, is that I'm a big horror fan and a big horror geek. And so I'm always happier when I'm writing monsters and writing horror and writing scary stuff. And I never expected to write for kids. Even that first Doctor Who audio I was talking about, it was a time where there weren't very many approval processes in place, because, as I said, the BBC thought it was a dead brand. So that first Doctor Who was quite a harsh horror version of Doctor Who in a lot of ways. And so that's always been my first, what I fall back on. Because of my work on Doctor Who, and because of what happened with Doctor Who, and Doctor Who returned and became a live brand again, and became more of a family show like it was originally back in the 60s and 70s. That brought the audience down to a younger age. And because of that work, and because of the work that I was doing with Doctor Who and adapting to a younger audience, that led to other work. And it led to me doing a lot of work with middle grade properties, specifically the Skylanders. Do you remember the Skylanders game that came out when you had the little figures you put on the portal and they went into the game? So I wrote the majority of the books that linked in with that right at the beginning. And it was because of that you can trace the line that led me to writing Star Wars as well. And but yeah, it led to lots more sort of middle grade and younger fiction than I ever thought I would write. I enjoy it. It's not what I thought I would naturally fall into. And actually, it was what I became known for in a lot of areas as well. And so it was a bit of a roundabout the houses kind of way to come to do what I'm doing now. And yeah, as I said, it was I would say you can trace the line from those Skylander books through to Adventures in Wild Space, which was the first things I wrote for Star Wars, because they looked at the Skylanders work I've been doing, and they looked at the kind of books I've been writing, and they wanted someone who could work in that way. And so yeah, it's definitely not something I planned. It's something I enjoy, and I enjoy more than I thought I was going to do. And the work I did through Wild Space, through Star Wars Adventures at IDW, has been some of the most gratifying work of my career, and dealing with young readers and young fans has been a complete and utter joy, tied into the fact that my kids were around the same age as well at the time. So that was good. And then I was able to combine my hobbies in a way, combine my interests, and write all age horror for Star Wars in Vader's Castle. So everything sort of came about. I mean, the will of the Force. And so as a career, sometimes you have your plans and you have your goals, but you also, if you want to be a writer who is a jobbing writer at first, and you want to build this career, you go where the writing is, and that's what I did, and I followed those sort of the younger reader books, and yeah, that's where it led me.
Yeah, that's really great. I think it's it must be easier to write those things when you have kids around those age to bounce those ideas off the little ones.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, that's a lot of different things, right? So based on your previous works, like whether it's Doctor Who, Skylanders, you have some Warhammer things, obviously lots of radio dramas and plays, et cetera. Yeah. What do you think of those previous works before you jumped into the Star Wars High Adventures with IDW? Do you think best prepared you to kind of jump into writing those Star Wars stories?
Well, I think it's knowing how to deal with a licensed property, knowing how to deal with the fact that you're going to have various people approving your work, giving you advice on your work. And doing this kind of work is a very different job to a lot of writing jobs, because you have to check your ego in the door a bit, and you have to believe passionately in what you're doing, and you have to know, but because of that, you have to know what battles to fight. And this is something you learn by doing licensed work. And I think all those jobs I did before prepared me for dealing with something like Star Wars, which is obviously a huge universe with so many different stories going on at the same time, and so many levels of approval and control and advice, and tying into things that you don't necessarily know why you're tying into something, but it's there anyway. And so that was especially I did quite a lot of work to tie into Solo, and didn't know much about Solo, to be fair, but knew there was elements I had to hit to tie my stories into it. And so, yeah, all the work I did prepared me for that. And also, I think a lot of the radio work I did and the comic work I did, those are jobs when you're part of a team, and they're collaborative. And again, you have to know how not to just be one voice in the middle of it, or you have to know how, give and take, have to know how to work with other people, other creatives. And that has been important in general in Star Wars, but then crucial when we've got to the High Republic phase. And I think that's one of the reasons I was chosen to be part of the High Republic, or what became the High Republic, because they knew I was a team player, and that came from my earlier work.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense, and I can really definitely see that in your writing. And I think it's some of that, for me personally, when I first started covering your work, it was in the Star Wars Adventures in Wild, or Star Wars Adventures in Wild Space with IDW. So a little bit on that, if you're not familiar, for our listeners, follows the Graphs and crew carrying out a lot of really great adventures out on like the fringes of space, with lots of characters created originally by Cavan, and introduces a lot of really great legacy characters back into the canon. We all know our favorite long-eared friend.
So you get turned up sooner or later in this conversation.
Yeah, how could you not? He's fantastic. But and then you have like these, and I think the most beautiful thing about the Star Wars Adventures in Wild Space and kind of like that whole line that you got to work on itself is the fact that it is generated to a younger audience, but you put in so many great Easter eggs. And that's why I call you a lore guru, because of things like Jackson and all these other various characters. So can you talk about kind of what was like your approach to that Star Wars debut, and how did it feel like to make your own characters in the universe, and how did you balance all of this long-standing lore, but still being able to inject some really kind of new and innovative characters into the universe?
Sure. Well, I mean, the great thing of inventing the graphs was that because they're invented for a book series for kids, a sort of chapter book series before Star Wars Adventures. And the joy of that was it was a bit of an easier route in, because I think I would have been completely, while I've worked in other universes, Star Wars being so important to me and these characters being so iconic. And this is obviously, I started working prior to the sequel trilogy coming out. So, dealing with original trilogy and legacy characters from Legend. If I'd been thrown straight into that world, I think I might have found it a little bit too daunting. By creating the graphs and the little adventures they were having in wild space, I could touch on elements that we all know from Star Wars, but I had the comfort blanket of creating my own little corner of it. So then when we get into Star Wars Adventures and the other work I started to do with the Choose Your Own Adventure books and all those kind of things, and I started dealing with Luke and Han and Leia and Vader and all these characters that have meant so much to me for the majority of my life. I already felt that I had my feet in the Star Wars territory and I knew what I was doing. And so, yeah, it was a nice way to work my way into it. Now, the joy of that was actually I created the graphs thinking they would be a one story group. And now that family, I've returned to them and aged the characters up into adults through the Vader's Castle series. And through the High Republics and other things as well, we've seen the Graf family expand, to the fact they have an archive in the sequel trilogy and in the High Republic through the work of Justina, primarily in the young adult books and the middle grade. We know that the Graf's background is actually quite sinister, and it's incredible to see that become part of that tapestry. And I think that's the joy of working on Star Wars, is that things you create, other people build on. And so it always makes me smile when I see the name Graf turn up in something or other, especially when I didn't know it's going to be there. And so that's the joy, is that when you go onto Wikipedia and you start looking through things and you click on something, you go, oh, that's cool. And then you've forgotten that you were the one who was part of the original story that created it. That's a really cool thing to feel. And so, yeah, it's exciting knowing that I've in some way added elements to Star Wars that will always be there, because that's the thing about Star Wars. Canons can come and go, as we know. But actually these stories return, and they, it's like poetry, it rhymes. They come back and over and over and over again. And yeah, part of my job that I've taken on myself is to reintroduce elements from Legends and the expanded universe as well, that I loved, back into modern canon. Because for me, Star Wars is Star Wars. I don't really care what labels on the front of it. A Legend story, a expanded universe story, a canon story, it's Star Wars. It's great. And it doesn't mean I enjoy every part of it, but I appreciate the Star Wars-ness of it. So yeah, it gives you as a writer so many different areas that you can pull a thread from that tapestry and tie it into another part of it. And that's just fun.
Yeah, it's great. If you would have told me, in 2016, 2017, when I'm reading, about the graphs, that we would have them all the way back into like the High Republic and, all the way into the future and everything like that, I don't know if I would have believed you, but it's a beautiful thing to see. And kind of like in that vein, it's like, while you like these, specifically like this Adventures in Wild Space and like these other Star Wars adventures that you've worked on are obviously more directed towards kids, but they do have a lot of heavier things. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. In a lot of these series. I think a lot about Vader's Castle series, which is one of my favorites that you've done. The smaller one-off stories like Roger, Better the Devil You Know, and those things. They do have deeper message, and some of them have straight out horror elements. So how do you find that balance between writing for children but also still incorporating things that would typically be reserved for like an older audience?
I think a lot of it has got to be from the fact I'm a 1970s kid. And a British 1970s kid, and most of the media we had over here in the 1970s seemed to be designed to scar us for life. And horror and kids fiction, especially over here, I'm not so sure what it was like in the States, went hand in hand. Whether that's Doctor Who, whether that's Children of the Stones, which was a TV show over here, going into the 80s, our version of the Choose Your Own Adventure books was something called Fighting Fantasy, which, were quite dark fantasy, but aimed at kids. And so I always had that in the back of my mind, that children's stories are frightening. And children, as I know from my own, as I know with kids I've worked with in schools, as going in as an author, as I know from my childhood, love being scared. I think what you've got to do is be respectful of their age, and be responsible. And there's only so far you can take horror, but I think horror has to be there. And because the world's a scary place, and I think it helps kids prepare for what's coming in a fantasy or a science fiction or a safe environment, because they can put the book down, they can put the comic book down, they can turn off the telly, and they can play it themselves, and they can act it out with their toys or in the playground. And yeah, so I'm very much of the mindset that it's important for children's authors to push the fear side of things of their story, the peril of their story, but always bearing in mind that you have to be respectful of who your reader is, and you can't be too gory, and you can't leave your characters in peril for too long, because you don't want to scar the readers. You want to thrill them. And that's a very thin line, but one I think you can usually tread. And you just treat them, as I said, with respect. Those stories that we wrote for Star Wars Adventures and Vader's Castle, they were very much, from everyone working on them, and myself personally, they were viewed as all age comics, not kids comics. And in the sense that anyone could hopefully pick them up and enjoy them. And yeah, that means you get the continuity references, and you get perhaps a little bit scarier than you expected at points. With the continuity references, you want to make sure they add to the story, they don't detract. They're a reward for people who know stuff, but they're not also a stick to beat people who don't. And so whenever I try and put a Easter egg in, and try and make sure that it doesn't trip anyone up. And let's face it, George Lucas was putting Easter eggs in to Star Wars before we knew they were Easter eggs, with Obi-Wan's conversation with Luke about the Clone Wars. We'd never heard what that is. We don't know what the Clone Wars is. Now it's an Easter egg. Brilliant. So it's built into Star Wars, which is why Star Wars has thrived, because the background and the backstory, even the backstory we didn't know, is always just hinted there. And so as writers, we can keep throwing those things in, whether it's something that existed in a book or something that didn't exist up to that point, and it's just a breadcrumb you're leaving for someone else. It's baked into Star Wars that those moments exist.
Yeah, it's really great. I think that really kind of tugs at another string that I like to pull. So one of my favorite things about your work in Star Wars Adventure, specifically, Vader's Castle, is your ability to bring in pop culture references and stories from like our own universe and bring them to Star Wars. So what has been your favorite, element or story or character that you've been able to inject into Star Wars that's like really resonated with you? I'm partial to Christopher Lee's Dracula. I thought it was done beautifully. I'm not a big horror guy by any stretch of the imagination, but like I love what you did there. So what would be kind of like your favorite that you've been able to do so far?
I think the most fun is still combining the Ewoks with Wicker Man, which I still can't believe to this day they let me get away with. And I think actually really helped set the stall for Vader's Castle. I think when people saw that, when they saw Francesco's original cover of the spooky zombie Ewoks, I think that's when they realized, oh, hang on, this might be worth a look. And yeah, I just love the fact that they allowed me to get away with a giant Wicker Man or a Wicket Man Ewok. Yeah, I mean, it's another thin line you have to tread between. I don't want to make anything a parody. I wanted to have fun with things and do tributes to some of my favorite horror stories and some of my favorite spooky stories. So I think linked into the Dracula Dooku story is the Peter Cushing Frankenstein story from the second series of Vader's Castle. When we gave a chance to do Tarkin as Baron Frankenstein, which of course was Peter Cushing's Hammer horror role other than Van Helsing. So again, being a kid of the 70s, being a Hammer fan, growing up in that era when these films were shown on telly all the time late at night. And knowing Peter Cushing for as much as his role in Hammer films as being Grand Moff Tarkin, I think that's the one that I still love the fact that we could get away with and we could do. And, you know, and that people responded to it as well. That's always good.
Yeah, definitely. And if you haven't, you know, engaged in those series, please do. They are super fantastic and some of like the coolest imagining of Star Wars that I've seen. But let's take it back, you know, 200 years and talk about the High Republic. I love all of the things you've done in the Skywalker saga in terms of story, but you know, the High Republic, I think, goes without saying, is, you know, brilliant. It's fantastic. Virtual applause to you and the rest of the writers for delivering some of, you know, the most amazing Star Wars stories that we've gotten. And it's only been a year. So thank you so much for that. And your role, you know, is varied as is the rest of the writing team, but you've taken on the main High Republic run for Marvel instead of the Adventures run. And how has that been different? Taking on kind of like the quote unquote, you know, adult main story of the High Republic versus like the Adventures work that you've done so well in the past.
Well, I think it did give me a chance to try, again, the kind of storytelling that I originally set out to tell when I set out to be a writer. It gave me the chance to go into things a little bit more depth, and perhaps push some of the darker elements of the story. But really, I think it's not to say you can't deal with real emotion in the kids area or in the all-age comics, and I think Daniel's showing that time and time again with High Republic Adventures as well. But I knew that I wanted to be able to get my teeth into a different kind of relationship in the Marvel run with Skier and Keeve, which again I would have been able to do in the all-age comics, but perhaps in a different way. And so it gave me a chance to really push and play with those characters, and also to write slightly older characters, because that's part of the thing when you're writing for a all-age stroke kids comic, you're usually dealing with kids, and I wanted to be dealing with slightly older characters, which is one of the reasons why I pushed to try and get hold of the Marvel run, because originally we didn't know what we were going to be writing. When we were working on the story, we were breaking it together, we had no idea which of us were going to be given what assignments, but I did keep pushing that I wanted a chance to write the Marvel, not expecting really, to be honest, that I'd be writing it through phase 1 and phase 2, which is what's happening. And so that's been amazing and great. And coming home, because I've said before in other interviews, the original Marvel run was my introduction to Star Wars before I saw a film. So it did feel a bit like a coming home for me, that I was writing something with the Star Wars logo on the front cover and the Marvel logo next to it, because that's how I first experienced the galaxy far, far, so far away.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And we've gotten to see like lots of like really cool, just like different looks at the Jedi that we're used to, you know, their ability, the way that they see the Force as like intricate song or like vast oceans, etc. You know, light whips and, you know, all these cool lightsaber designs. What's kind of been like your favorite element that they've added to like the High Republic era, and like how that changes the way we see the Jedi of the time?
Well, I think we've had a chance to really think about the Jedi as human beings, whether they're human or not, you know, as people who are fallible, people who aren't superheroes, people who all have hopes and fears. And yes, we know that fear leads to the dark side. But for me, the Jedi should never be, they're not Vulcans, they feel, you know, and what makes a Jedi special is how they control that. And how they control their emotions. And you go back to George Lucas's, you know, original comments about the Jedi, you know, that Jedi can love, but they can't be attached. And that's something I keep coming back to time and time again. And I think that's why we find Jedi so fascinating, so endlessly fascinating, and why the best Jedi we've seen in other storytelling as well are the flawed Jedi, or the Jedi who struggle, and the Jedi who struggle and still prove themselves, like Obi-Wan, who is, you know, up there with the greatest Jedi of all time. Obi-Wan who made mistakes, Obi-Wan who let people down, and Obi-Wan who was the person who gave Luke his mission and made the sacrifice so Luke could continue and bring down the Empire. And that's what I've loved about being able to do in the High Republic, and read what the other guys are doing as well. to really explore what it's like to be a hero in this time. And some of those heroes fail, and some of those heroes come through the fire and are forged in something else. And yeah, that's, as a writer, that's one of the most satisfying things that I've done in Star Wars, and hopefully it's coming across for the readers as well.
Yeah, it definitely is. And in that same vein, Keeve Trennis, we have to talk about Keeve. I think personally for me, she's been my favorite Jedi of this time since that issue 1 of the High Republic Marvel run. She's complex in a way that feels more relatable than say like a Bar Chris or like Stellan Gios, who are great in their own right, but she just feels different in a lot of ways. And we've seen her do some really great things, and we've seen some crazy amount of growth from her character over the first dozen issues of the High Republic. So what was your thought process going into her character? Because I think she does kind of toe that line, as you mentioned before, of being aged up enough where she's not, the character you would put in an all age story, but also not as old as like a Abar Chris, Stellan Gios, who've kind of been there, done that. So how did you go about her character?
She was right there from my first ever pitch to what became the High Republic, and she did evolve. But I've talked about this before in various other places, but I always feel it deserves to be repeated. She came from the fact that I went to that very first retreat at Skywalker Ranch and felt completely overwhelmed with the fact that I was sitting at that table and I was there of all the places in the world, in the universe, at Skywalker Ranch, sitting with these other people who I respected, sitting with all these great editors, with Story Group, with everyone who'd been working on Star Wars, with that legacy literally over my shoulder of who created Star Wars. And sitting in another Skywalker Ranch is its own universe in it as well, created by George Lucas. It's the most creative place I think I've ever been, and I felt completely overwhelmed. And I had a massive moment of imposter syndrome halfway through the week, and I was like, I'm not going to be able to do this. They've made a mistake, and that's when I realized that's the Jedi story I want to tell. I want to tell the story of someone who has those doubts in a different way to the fact that, when we see Luke having doubts, but, someone who is good and deserves to be there, because I have to understand that I was asked to be part of that group because obviously they saw something in me to do the work. So for the same point with Keeve, I wanted to be a sense that she has the abilities. She isn't a god. She will make mistakes. She can't do everything. But she has a good heart and still has her doubts, and suddenly realizes that the people around her maybe aren't the gods either that she thought they were, and through that understand. And it's that moment when you hear, as a writer, Neil Gaiman talking about his apostasy syndrome, and you go, oh, so if Neil Gaiman has it, then I guess that's all right, and I can cope, and that's what I wanted to explore with Keeve. She grew. I mean, her potty mouth that she has came out of the first draft, and I didn't know she was going to swear in the way she does. But it felt right for the character in that moment, and it came from those moments when she first meets Ava and goes, "Oh, beep," because she's suddenly overwhelmed by this situation. And I think that's probably there with the fact of, my memory of walking into the movie theater at Skywalker Ranch, seeing the statues from Palpatine's office in the prequels and going, beep, can't believe I'm here. And so, yeah, she's definitely influenced and by that entire feeling. And what has been so gratifying is seeing other people seeing that in her and identifying that. And she has gone through a very emotional roller coaster in 12 issues, and that's only going to continue.
Wow, that's really great to hear. And you can definitely see, yourself from what you said coming out in her character 100%. And I think if you are listening to this and you haven't really engaged too much in the comics and you don't know about Keeve's character, please take, some time to go check her out in the comics. She hasn't had a huge role in the novels as of yet, but when do you think that she's going to be ready as a character to kind of make that jump into the novels where she can be, that character that people look at outside of just, the three main Jedi that we've seen throughout so far?
I think she could make the jump into a novel at any point if the story was right. And I think that's the thing. She hasn't been needed in those novels. You know, she's in the Tempest Runner audio drama with Skier because she had a role to play in that. And I think that's what we've tried to do with the High Republic, is not say you have to have those characters in every book or every comic or every iteration. They have to be in the stories that they're important for. And again, that all comes back to writing these stories, creating this saga. It's character first, you know, and story first. And yeah, the characters are where they need to be. And so, yeah, Keeve has not needed to be so far in any of those sort of main Del Rey novels or the YA novels or anything like that. Her time may come in the future. I don't know. At the minute, the place for her to tell her stories in the comics. As I said, she has a role to play in the Tempest Runner audio as well. But that's been her home for now.
Yeah, I'd be lying to say when I heard her voice in Tempest Runner that I wasn't a little bit scared about how you're gonna deal with her. But it makes me a little bit happy that, you know, we're gonna get more, and then she's not, you know, at least at the time or at the moment, you know, on the docket for the next big scare that we've seen in some of the novels so far. So transitioning,
we've still got 3 more issues of the High Republic.
No, don't tell me that. Yeah, don't tell me that. Don't tell me that. I have to review the next one next week, so I'm already scared. So, you know, moving a little bit away from the heroes and talking about Tempest Runner, you had a really great run of talking about the heroes, but you're also no stranger to the villains in the galaxy. We've talked about, you know, Vader's Castle, Dooku Jedi Lost is fantastic. Yep. It's one of the main reasons I was so excited for Tempest Runner. I think the audio drama format really lends to like making these villains, like you said before with a Jedi, making them seem more human while still maintaining that they're, you know, well, you know, quote unquote bad guys. So how different is it to write a character like Lorna D, who is, you know, again, slowly become one of my favorite villains of this era, compared to a character like Keeve? And do you have to like toe any kind of line in making them like too relatable, or is it just making a complex character and kind of just like letting the dominoes fall where they fall?
I think letting the dominoes fall where they fall is vital for any of this. So for the entire planet of the High Republic, we have had certain beats that we knew we were going to hit. Lorna has come out of it in a way. She has been one of those wonderful moments when characters grow out of their original plot point. And Lorna was always there, and she was created by Charles for Light of the Jedi, and she took on a life of her own, very much so. And originally, I wasn't down to write the audio for Tempest Runner. I don't think we even knew right at the beginning we were going to have audios. You know, Dooku was an experiment, and it's an experiment that thankfully worked, and we followed that up with the Afra audio book. And I think when Charles was writing Night of the Jedi and I was writing Tempest Runner, The Rising Storm, pardon me, because those 2 books were written overlap. You know, there was an overlapping in the writing. Charles was editing Light of the Jedi when I was writing The Rising Storm. I saw Lorna in the pages, and I wanted to do something more with her, and I realized that she was a character who could grow. And again, I think then through that period when we were experimenting with her, and her role in the Rising Storm grew to what it was originally planned in the outline. That's when we started to realize that we could tell more stories with her. And while she was going to have a role right the way through, she kept pushing back the boundaries of what that role would be, and so she became far more important in the greater storytelling, and people responded to her, which has been amazing to see. And so, yeah, we've always maintained, and it's true, that we know where we're going, and we know what we're doing, and we know what the end is for literally all these characters. But we've given ourselves enough freedom that we can guide our way through that. And sometimes the characters take on a life of their own, and then we have to work out, well, how are we going to tell this story then? And yeah, Lorna's definitely been one of those characters who has grown. And as I said, I wasn't originally down for writing Tempest Runner. I didn't know when I was writing The Rising Storm that there was going to be an audio drama until I think towards the end of the process of writing that book. And then when that call came through, would I like to explore Lorna's backstory? Would I like to explore what it is to be Lorna D in 6 hours of audio, which is obviously where I came from in writing as well, from writing drama in the past. I jumped at it because I knew that it was a really good chance to explore the character. And that's what the great thing has been with the High Republic, especially those 3 Del Rey books. They're big blockbuster books. That's what, they were always supposed to be. They're big set pieces with lots of characters. And I know some people don't like the fact there's so many characters in there and it moves so quickly. That's pretty much what those books were supposed to be. And that was the brief we were given. You have those big moments when you push through what's going on to the galaxy and the effect that has on the people in the book. What the High Republic initiative as a whole is giving us is chances to explore those characters in greater detail. So yes, some people may think there isn't enough Lorna D in the Rising Storm, but that's fine because we had a chance to explore her in Tempest Runner. And now she's come into the Marvel comic again, which she was always supposed to. But actually, it was amazing because when I knew that she was going to be coming into the comic, and I knew I was going to be getting to those points of writing that soon, by the time I got to writing those issues, I'd written 6 hours of her in the audio drama. So I knew so much more about her. And that hasn't changed her trajectory at all for the future phases of the initiative, but it has informed how she gets there. And that's why this entire process and this entire project is still exciting me, because as I keep reiterating over and over again, it's the characters and the story that's important for all this. Everything else that goes with writing a Star Wars story is secondary. It's character first, character first, character first. And everything we're planning is influenced by that character development, which is a natural part of the creative process.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to put it. And it really does make sense of what you mentioned earlier with having, characters come up in the story when they're necessary in the story. And I think having her end and having Tempest Runner come up after makes a whole lot of sense. It really does add to like that flair. And if you haven't, listened to Tempest Runner, please do, because it's fantastic. But it definitely adds a little bit to her character when we do see her in Rising Storm. For me, I didn't feel like we needed more of her because I already got more of her later, and you can see her in other aspects. And you kind of answered this like a little bit, but if you want to give a couple thoughts on it. So like when you have these characters like Lorna D, who you didn't, initially create, but you had probably the most time to expand on through like the comic series and Tempest Runner. What's it like sharing these really great characters between all of these stories with, fabulous authors and writers like Charles and Claudia and Justina? Like, how do you maintain the integrity of the characters, but still, add your own to like their own ethos and their, the middle part, where they're going, but how do you add to the, middle part without, stepping on any toes?
Well, I think you try and do it with as much respect as you can, and we talk and we share and we check and we say, what do you think? And that's been throughout the process something we've tried to maintain. And again, it's all part of checking your egos at the door. It's that moment when you realize that, hang on, this character isn't just mine, and so you have to tag team. And actually, those tag team moments are the things that bring the most creativity, because someone will do something with a character and you go, well, I would never, ever in a million years have done that with that character. How is that going to affect what I'm doing next? And so it's like the biggest game of consequences in the world. And again, knowing where they all end up, and we've all written documents when we, individually have written where these characters are ending up and where they're going and what their trajectory is. You think, well, how am I going to get them there in the most interesting way? And it's been one of the most rewarding parts of it. I mean, again, it's great when you see a character you've created turn up in another story. I mean, there's never a surprise. It's happening. But what is surprising is sometimes when you read it and it gives you a fresh understanding of that character that you hadn't thought of. And that's another one. I keep saying exciting because this entire process is exciting, but that's one of the most rewarding aspects of this, is that just like real life people, these characters can surprise you because you're not in control of every part of their destiny. And you have to roll with the punches and work out, okay, I know I've still got to get to A to Z. How am I going to get there now? And yeah, that's where the challenge is a good one, because it pushes you, and it pushes you to tell the best story possible.
Yeah, and in that same vein, so like we're at the point now where many of the authors have kind of had their shot at like the big Del Rey adult novels, like those blockbusters, like you mentioned. For me personally, I think the Rising Storm, your novel, was like the first big shift in where we're at in the series. We had all of this, for light and life and lots of excitement, and now we're not not so much at the moment. Without giving too much away, some of our heroes obviously aren't going to make it to the end of this story. You took this like kind of more or less at like the next level in the later issues of the High Republic in 2021, where we're seeing like the best of the Jedi start to falter in their beliefs and motivations. And now we have Claudia Gray's, the Fallen Star, when if what happens there. So, and this total shift has happened in just a year. Like, I thought that we'd have a lot longer before, stuff starts to hit the fan, but here we are. And the continuity has just been astounding between all of the comics and the books and things like that. So what do you think goes into delivering such a satisfying twist that we are seeing in the High Republic era in a franchise that's historically like hard to please at times?
Oh, it's always hard to please. And the thing is, you can't please everyone. And you shouldn't as well. I'm a very firm believer that not everyone is going to like everything. And they shouldn't like everything, because what a boring world that will be. And yeah, I've got no problem if someone doesn't like what I've done. It's interesting. And it's interesting watching reaction. And obviously, we've known a long time what's coming from the writer's point of view. Seeing people react to the events of things like Fallen Star. And I'm giving no spoilers here, so don't worry if you're listening to this and you've not read. I think what people, and perhaps we didn't really explain this, Fallen Star isn't the end. It's like, midway through a story, or at the beginning of the middle of a story. And you've got to think about this as being one huge story. And the Rising Storm took a lot of people by surprise, I think. If you know anything about story structure and the 3-act play and all those kind of things, and I don't want to get too technical for people who aren't interested or don't know, but you have your exciting instant, your catalyst for the action. That's the Rising Storm. And those things happen right at the beginning of a story. So in Star Wars terms, that's Luke's auntie and uncle being killed. That's, if you think about where that is in Star Wars, that's the Rising Storm. And so that's the beginning of our story in a lot of ways. Light of the Jedi, the early issues of both comic series, the YA, the middle grade, setting up the world, that was the setup. It was the pre-title sequence. It was setting the world and going and say, here are the Jedi, aren't they glorious? Bang, something's going to happen. And that's what the Rising Storm was. And again, now we're seeing it with Fallen Star. That's not the end of any story here. That is just another part of this path we're on. And whether, some characters survive, some characters don't. The characters who survive, again, they're at the beginning of their journeys, and they've got a long way to go. And because of how we think about trilogies, and we've seen those 3 books as a trilogy and the 3 YA books as trilogies and all that kind of things, people are thinking this is sort of an end point, and it's not. It's just another step in the journey. And so, yeah, this entire first phase is just that. It's a first phase. It's the beginning of a story. I wouldn't even say it's episode 4. I would say it's a part of episode 4. So, yeah, I think that's the thing we need to remember. There is a long way to go.
Yeah, that has me even more excited than I was at the start of this conversation. And I think what makes this so great is that you have so many characters that people are already attached to. And
it's been amazing.
What makes those moments so impactful when they do happen in the novels or in the comics or whatever the case is. And you mentioned a little earlier that some people are the amount of characters that are in the story can be daunting, but I think it's important because these are different Jedi than we're used to. And I'm curious, just from your perspective, like, do you think the clear relationship bonds that these Jedi have at this time are to kind of blame for their recent fall from grace that we're currently having in our time period as it stands right now? Or do you think that those bonds are like necessary to separate them from the Jedi that we know from the Skywalker saga?
We absolutely wanted to have a difference in the Jedi because it's a different era. And, as we always say, 200 years is a long time. If you could put yourself next to one of your ancestors from 200 years ago, you would have different conversations and different views. And when you're dealing with religion, where you're dealing with a philosophy, again, 2 centuries can lead to a lot of changes. The central cause can be the same. The actual doctrines and the way they live those doctrines out can be very, very, very different. And so, yeah, I think if we'd made them exactly the same as the Jedi we'd seen in the Skywalker saga, why would you do it? Because you've seen those Jedi. Yeah, and actually, if I want to read a story about that kind of Jedi, I want to read a story set in the prequel era. I want to read a story with Obi-Wan. I want to read a story with Anakin, of Mace. And so, yeah, I think it was important for us to try something different, which is what we were doing. As for how they are and whether that, I mean, again, there's a bit of a joke online that I have a favorite GIF whenever someone's asked me a question. It's a clip from Doctor Who, and it's Sylvester McCoy's Doctor saying, "Time will tell." It always does. And again, this is one of those moments. You know, we're going to see how these relationships play out and what difference it makes. Again, we know where we're going as far as the galaxy is concerned because we've seen it and we know where history leads us. That doesn't mean we're necessarily going to tell the story that people expect us. We're going to, you can tell. You can read something set in the 18th century and know what happens in the 20th and 21st, but you can still be surprised by that story in the 18th century. And that's basically what we're dealing with here. It's what, again, the joy of George Lucas setting this as history. Tip of the hat in every way, Mr. Lucas, well done, because it makes it myth, it makes it history, it gives you the ability to surprise and shock. And that's hopefully what we're going to do.
Wow, that's really, really well said. And I hope that, a lot of our conversations today has gotten people interested, except we haven't spoiled anything, just so we're clear. We haven't given you any spoilers. There's a whole lot of story for you guys to experience if you're not caught up. So I know a lot of readers and our listeners may not be, but, from your own perspective, Cavan, after a year of content in the High Republic, where would you encourage a new reader to start to get into this great story that you and the other writers have put forth so far?
I mean, I think literally you can start. I mean, hopefully every book in some way, whether that's the adult range, the YA range, the middle grade, the comics, every issue and every book should be a jumping on point. And we're trying our hardest, even though the story's getting bigger, to have jumping on points in those books. Personally, I would say you want to start, go back to Light of the Jedi and start. And the one thing I always see people getting panicky about, oh no, there's so much content and I feel bad that I'm not keeping up with it. Don't feel bad. Experience this at your own rate. Yes, there is always the fear that you might get spoiled online, because let's face it, that seems to be what Twitter's for half the time. Shouting at people, arguing and spoiling stuff. But if you take a year to read Light the Jedi, take a year to read it. If you again, read stuff, go and read other stuff, for heaven's sake. Come back to the High Republic. I hope you experience these stories if you're interested in Star Wars, but never feel that you have to keep on top of it. The High Republic ain't going anywhere, no matter what certain YouTube channels want to tell you. It's here for the duration, and the books are always going to be on the shelves, or on your Kindle, or on Comixology, or wherever. So experience this at your own rate. Do it the way you want to as well. There are so many ways in. If you want to read, go for the Del Rey books because you want that big blockbuster thing with lots of characters. Fantastic. If you want a more intimate story, go for one of the younger age books. Go for something like Monster Temple Peak, which is a standalone story about one of the characters. We've tried to give as many ways into this as we possibly can, because that's what Star Wars does. And I said, my way into Star Wars wasn't the film. I was slightly too young for the first film. I was bang on the right age for Empire. And by God, by the time I got to Return of the Jedi, I was blown away. But, my way in was picking up a Marvel comic. And reading a Marvel comic with, yes, that green rabbit in it. That's why I love him so much, because I met him before I met Luke Skywalker. But that means what I love about Star Wars, what I love about any fandom, and why I get so angry at people who start throwing around the terms of being a real fan, is it doesn't matter how you get into it. It doesn't matter if you've read one comic, one book, or all the comics, or all the books. You're still a fan. You're a fan if you love something. And you're a fan if you want to read something more, or experience something more, or play another game, or watch another film, or even if you just want to watch that film over and over and over and over and over and over again. It doesn't matter. And I think we put so much emphasis on what matters and what doesn't in fandom. What matters is that you get something out of what you're experiencing. And that's what being a fan and being a reader and and enjoying the experience is all about.
Yeah, that's very well said. And yeah, I mean, I couldn't put it any better myself. I think from the fan perspective, as someone who's kind of engaged in a lot of the material of the High Republic, most of it, not all of it, you guys do a really great job of being an entry point in every, from the opening crawl of the book to the very end. There's things in there to kind of catch you up on the story, and it's not done in a overly expositional way. So I think from a fan perspective, you guys are nailing it in that way for sure. And I can't wait to see more that we have in phase 2, and then jumping all the way to a different era at the in October. So very excited.
Which I know took people as a bit of a shock. I know that was a surprise to people.
Yeah,
and again, we were all a bit nervous about how were people going to react to that. And thankfully, the reaction has largely been positive. So that's it's good to see people excited. Throughout all of this, we've lived this so long. That again, it was a relief when the first books landed and people liked them. It was a relief where we had the second wave of books and people had engaged with the characters and invested in them. So the shocks were shocking, because that would have been so bad if they hadn't worked. And again, we were all beginning of January this year, we were all biting our nails going, what will they do when they hear 150 years in the past? And thankfully most people went, okay then, show me. And that's what you want.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge Knights of the Old Republic fan, so as far as you want to go back, I'll be there, ready and willing, especially if the stories are going to be this good moving forward. So as we kind of run out of conversation, I just wanted to take a quick moment to just fire off some rapid fire questions about some of your favorite Star Wars things, just for my own curiosity and the curiosity of some of our listeners. So if you could be trained by any Jedi, who would it be and why? Or Sith, Sith, if you want to take that route as well.
I don't think I could cope being trained by Yoda. I think he would drive me insane. I mean, I've mentioned him a few times in this conversation because he's so important to me. And there are various action figures and mugs with his face in this room, but it's Obi-Wan, because Obi-Wan lived, and he lived a life, and he stayed true to his beliefs. And I am so excited for the series. I know barely anything about it, which is the way I want it, because I want to be blown away by it. Yeah. Always Obi-Wan. Yeah, he would be my mentor and my master every day.
Right. So what would your ideal lightsaber design be? Would you go single blade, double blade, dual wield, light width?
I think, to be fair, if I had a lightsaber, I'd be chopping my own arm off than anyone else. I think, if anything, I'd need something shorter, like a light dagger. I think it'd be too dangerous to give me. I'm too clumsy. To give me anything long, I'd be a danger to myself and everyone else.
I would love to see a light dagger. That'd be fantastic. If you could take a vacation to any Star Wars planet, where would you go?
I want to go to Coruscant because it just looks incredible, and I love rural landscapes, and I'm a big countryside fan, but I'm a city boy at heart, probably, and that sort of team in the same way as when you go to Tokyo and you're completely overwhelmed by the amount of people there in the buildings. I think standing in the middle of Coruscant would be incredible, and so I think first stop would have to be Coruscant.
Yeah, I like that. If you could be a fly on the wall at any major Star Wars moment, which would it be?
These are good questions. These are good questions. I think I would want to be a fly on the wall at the moment where Palpatine is first taken on by his master.
Wow. Yeah, that'd be amazing. Yeah, we still need that, Well,
exactly, because we've seen it in areas in the past, but I'd like to see. Yeah, I'd like to see that. That'd be good.
Yeah, and then one last for this kind of rapid fire section here. If you had a chance to do another audio drama for somewhere in the Skywalker era of Star Wars, I think I might know the answer to this, but who would you focus on?
I think that would be that moment. I don't know. I'd love to do a Vader audio from Vader's POV. That would be incredible. If I'm going to complete my, keep working with villains on audio, I think it would have to be Vader, because that would be fascinating.
Great. Thank you for taking the indulging me in these random Star Wars questions.
They were great. Usually it's like, what's your favorite Star Wars film? And I have to go, it's always Return of the Jedi. But my favorites change so much on other things, and I'm always going, no, I can't remember what I said last time, because it depends what mood I'm in.
Yeah.
But always Return of the Jedi.
Yeah. So, at But Why Tho, we really pride ourselves on expressing how and why pop culture matters. It's one of the main reasons why we're called But Why Tho. If you've had to defend why Star Wars matters, why do you like Star Wars? Well, this is why. So, and pop culture itself, surrounds us, it penetrates us, binds us all together in a way. So if I were to ask Cavan Scott, why does pop culture matter to you?
Because it's given me friends that will last my entire life. It gives me connection to other people, and I always think those connections are stronger than the divisions that may break out in any fandom. Those connections are the things that matter. Wow,
thank you so much. I really do appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. It's been a treat and a half being able to talk to you and kind of pick your brain about all things Star Wars. I really do look forward to the future releases, even next week and moving forward. So thank you so much for all your contributions to Star Wars and fandom and things like that, and pop culture in general. You pop culture is better with your presence. So thank you so much.
Thank you. That's great.
If you'd like to let our listeners know what you have going on in the world, anything that you have upcoming or where they can find you, this would be a great moment to kind of plug all the things.
Yeah, sure. You can find me, my website, cavanscott.com, and you can find me on Twitter far too much. I'm trying not to be on Twitter as much as I am, but it doesn't always work. With Star Wars, the High Republic, that's where I'm at the minute, and that's where I'm going to be out for a long time. Beyond that, if you like the more horror side of my Star Wars, you could check out my creator-owned comic from Vault, which is called Shadow Service, which is a sort of James Bond with demons, and a female witch protagonist. MI666. It's a lot of fun, and hopefully you'll pick that up too.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cavan. And you can always find me on Twitter at SuperRuiz93, SuperRuiz 93, and the podcast and the website and all those great things on Twitter at But Why Tho PC, and of course all the great coverage that we do on butwhythopodcast.com. Cavan, thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.